Hey there, and welcome to Into the Terminal, episode 52. I'm Eric, the IT guy Hendricks, and joining me, as always, is my co-host, Mr. Scott McBrien himself. So, good morning, folks. Happy end of the year. This is our last live stream of the year, and we wanted to do something a little bit different, a little bit fun. So, kind of stick with us because we're not going to have a critical path per se, but we've thrown together some of our, I guess, favorite blunders, favorite sysadmin blunders. And we've tried to put them together, and so Scott, why don't you lead us off? I'm still recovering from a reboot here, so why don't you kick us off and tell us what you've broken, and let's go about fixing it.
Sure. So the first thing is today's episode is all about what we would call PEBCAC, right? Problem exists between chair and keyboard, or I've also heard it described as an ID10T error. So things that we do that are dumb, and hopefully we can troubleshoot them, or at least show how to troubleshoot them. All right, so I've got this box right here, and our first problem to troubleshoot is a web server problem. Right? So user reports that when we do this, we're trying to transfer the local page, that it fails. Okay, now I know everyone in the chat is going to immediately be like, SE Linux! It is not SE Linux. So just put that in your back pocket. Not happening today. However, this is something that I see happen fairly often to people that are new to disk management. So to just kind of walk through our troubleshooting thing here, because it's complaining about 404, the first thing I would do is I would actually look at the location where I expected this content to be. So we expect web content to be in var www html. Interesting. So indeed, the error about not finding the files is true because we can't seem to find that file directory, which is weird because it's created when we install the Apache web server. Or if we're using Nginx, it would also create its document root as part of that installation. So let's just see what's happening here. So over here in var www, where I'd expect to see things like CGI content, the HTML directory, and maybe my other website content, I don't see anything. But I do see this lost and found directory. And that tells me something very interesting. So lost and found is a directory put into extended type 2, 3, and 4 file systems at their top level directory. And it's so that when we file system check this file system, it finds any like data that thinks it's a file that doesn't have a file pointer that points to it. It goes into this directory so that somebody can take a look at it and evaluate it. But that's something I don't really expect to see here at var www per se. So since we have this weird like file system directory, let's take a look at our file system layout. So if we do a df-h, I can look at our disk free. I call your attention to that listing. So what we see is that there's a file system device that's installed on dev-sda3 that is mounted to var www. And that file system device that's mounted at var www appears to be empty. And so here's my solution. I'm going to unmount that directory, right? And we'll look at the df, and sure enough, it's not there anymore. And if I now look at var www, there's that web content that I expected to find initially. And if I do a curl of the localhost system, right there's my awesome sauce website content that I was expecting to find before that was actually giving me a 404 file not found. All right, so what happened? So What happened was somebody went through and they created a new file system and they mounted it on this directory mount point. And so the files that were in this directory before are still there. They've just been covered up by this new device of content, which doesn't have the same files and directories in it. And so where I commonly see this happen is when we've done something like, oh, we need to have our web content stored on this NAS. So you go out and you create the network attached storage or SAN or whatever type of storage you're using, and then you attach that storage onto your machine on top of the content that was already being used. So you're essentially obscuring that content by this new empty device. And really what you want to do is mount that to a temporary place like this. Let's mount DevSDA3 to a temporary place like the MNT directory. We can move or copy our files over. Right, so now I have my files that I was expecting. I can take it away from its temporary spot and then put it back into its permanent spot. And then if I do my curl, it should still work. Right? So what we forgot to do was we created the new device to hold all of our awesome sauce content, but we forgot to migrate that content to the new device before attaching it into the directory tree at its ultimately correct location. The other thing we should probably do is go ahead and add it to the etc fs tab so that when we reboot the machine, it comes back. We won't go into all the details of what goes in there. But that way, if we reboot the machine, it'll get mounted back in the correct location and we don't have a problem with missing data again. All right. So that was our first problem, overmounting, where you attach a new device on top of other data and then you obscure it and you can't access the data until you unmount the file system. All right, next problem. I installed some software on my machine, but I can't find it. So I installed a package on this machine called BCC Tools, and it has a whole bunch of applications to help me collect performance data on this machine. And one of those programs is CacheStat, and not found. But I know that I installed the software. So where's this program that I know that I installed, right? If I look, if I list the BCC Tools RPM that I know I installed, right, it says that it's installed. So why can't I find these programs that clearly are installed on the machine? One of our YouTube viewers, Aaron, asks, how did I install it? I did a DNF install BCC Tools. That's how I installed it. It's there. We're good. All right, so why can't I find these applications that are clearly installed on the machine? So first, let's take a look at where they're stored. So if I do an RPM-QL to query this RPM for a list of files that are provided, we're just going to send that to less because it could be a big list. Right here, we see CacheStat, right? That's the application I was looking for that said it couldn't find it. But clearly it's installed on the machine because it's as part of this RPM that I installed on the machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this command using the fully qualified path name. All right, so I'm going to actually just put in, here is the location of the binary I want you to run on the shell. Well, and that works. It's actually running and producing data, right? But when I do cache stat, command not found. All right, and I see that Vincent in our viewer pool has correctly guessed what the problem is. So when we install software on the machine and we try to run it from the command line, if we don't provide a fully qualified path to the executable file that we're trying to execute, um, a shell variable is used to try and find it. All right, so this variable path um, is the list of directories colon separated where we should find programs on the machine. And so if we just type in cache stat, it's going to look in user local bin for a file called cache stat. If it finds it, it runs it. But if it's not there, it'll check user local bin. And if it finds it, it'll run it. But if not, it'll check user sbin. And if it's not there either, it'll check user bin. Well, when I ran this by specifying the complete path to the executable I want to run, notice it's in user share BCC tools, a directory that is not on my path and environment variable to my shell. So the reason it's saying the command's not found is because I typed in the command I wanted, but it doesn't exist in any of the directories where we normally check for programs. All right, so the next question is, how do I fix that? One is I could continue to use the fully qualified path name to invoke commands in this directory, which is like obnoxious and dumb. So what we're going to do is we're going to add this other directory to the path environment variable. Like that. So what this statement is saying is set a variable on the shell called path, which is equal to the old value of path, colon, this additional directory. Right, so now we can see that at the end of path environment variable, there's this new directory that we'll check. And now when I run cache stat, it's able to locate that executable and run it, right? Because it's now looking in the right place to find it. All right, so I see one of the viewers is asking about the proper way to do that. All right, so what we have done is we have temporarily set this environment variable, right? So when I ran this command to add this extra directory in my path variable, it did it just inside this shell session, which means if I close the shell session, I log out, I reboot the machine, it won't be there because this environment variable only affects this session. So there are a couple different ways you can make this permanent. One is we can go to the system-wide configuration files for shells, which would give this to all users potentially. But these tools are actually performance tools and probably only need to be available for root. So what I would do is I would go into the root .bash profile. Yeah, I got spelled today. And in here, it runs the bash RC and sets up the root user's environment variable. And notice down there at the bottom, it says user-specific environment startup programs. So here's where I would say, let's go ahead and update our path environment variable to include this new directory. But because I did this in the root user's home, in the root users.bash profile, it only affects the root user's account and sessions. So if I sudo, I may or may not have it. Can't remember. If I'm logged in as a regular person, I won't see it. So it's only if the root user has a session created. Sudo has some options that will decide whether it should set up the environment differently or not. All right. So that's how I would fix that problem. All right, Eric, over to you for our next problem.
Yeah, kind of got things up and running now. So let's see. Let me increase the size on that. There we go. So I don't know about you all, but as a systems administrator, I use Vim quite a bit. And it took me a bit of time to figure out how to exactly work with Vim without breaking things. So I created a couple of test files here. And I'm going to do this backwards. So the first test file I wanted to work with was another test, .txt. So I'm going to go in and make some edits here to other test, but I get this weird error that let me zoom back out just a little bit so you can see the whole error. There we go. So you may have seen this error a number of times. So you might go in and you might hit quit and think, well, that was weird. Maybe I should try and just open it again. Okay, so something else is editing this file. Not really sure why. So what I could do is if I did a ps-ef and then do a grep for Vim. Excuse me. Oh, well, that's a problem. I have not one, but multiple different processes that are currently trying to edit that file. So what has probably happened is that I've been working in this file, and I went in to try and I probably tried to exit back out to the terminal to run some commands. And you notice that if I do a BG, which is background, you'll see that I've actually got 6 sessions that are doing a Vim on test.txt and Vim another test. So what I could do here is I could grab. Actually, let's do a. Is it a kill all? Scott, remind me. Is it a kill all to kill a process name?
Yes, you could do it that way.
Now, if I check my background, oh, hold on. Interesting. That didn't do what I expected it to do.
Yes, because a kill all sends signal 15, which is a nice kill, right? It actually goes to the process, and the process goes, the user wants me to die. I should close out everything and close myself. Except these processes are all stopped. So how are they receiving that signal 15 when they are halted from running?
That's a good point. So probably the easiest way then, and to not make a fool of myself live on air, is I can bring, I think it's FG. Yeah. I can bring a couple of my files.
You could also kill all -9, because that's a signal sent to the kernel instead of the process.
So yeah, let's do that. There we go. So now notice that I've got all these processes that just died here. This is what we get for me not trying these out and instead rebooting my system before we go live. So now there's no running Vim processes, so I can go in and I can write text, and I can do a :X, which actually does a save and quit. So if you've ever had trouble exiting Vim, now you know how. Now, the stepping away from Vim, because I think I just broke my other example, which is why I should have had multiple machines and not one. Scott and I were discussing that prior to the show going live. But one of the other things that I wanted to set up was I've got a web server, and for some reason, if I go out to the web server site, if I pull up the public IP address of this box, I don't get anything. So if I did a curl on localhost, and let's be explicit here, let's call out port 80. Connection refused. Well, that's a problem. I've got this really awesome website that I would like to show people, but nothing's happening. So if I do, say, an RPM-QA and grep for HTTPD, okay, I've got the packages in there. So if I use the same process tool as I did before, my process isn't running. But I installed the packages. Shouldn't that be enough? That's when I can go in and do a systemctl status on Apache, and notice that the process is inactive or dead. So a lot of times, what'll happen is you'll go in and you'll remember to do a DNF install, and then you do a systemctl start, and then you walk away thinking my website's up, everything's good, no problem, and then your system reboots, or you go in to make some changes to your web server and you forget something very important. If your process isn't running and you reboot your system, or if your process is running, then you reboot your system and then it's not, it's probably because you forgot to do a systemctl enable. And I like the tac now, which basically combines two commands into one. So I don't have to do a systemctl start and a systemctl enable on HTTPD. So it'll create that symlink so it starts on boot, and it also started a process. So if I do a status, I now see that I've got multiple HTTPD processes running. And it actually took me years to learn tac now, which saves a lot of typing. Now, if I do a curl on localhost, now I get that sample web page that says, "Hey, you're running Apache. That's awesome. You should probably put some real content here." So pretty sure I managed to break my. Yeah, I did. So Scott, I'll throw it over to you, and we can go through a few more examples here. We've got a few more minutes. Oh, too many cooks in the kitchen. There you go.
Thanks, Eric. So one of my examples is still building. So I will keep that going while you refresh your other one that was broken, then unbroken, then broken again, or something like that. And instead, we're going to take a look at, some really terrible typos. So I have this directory in the RHEL users home. So here as root, I can look at the RHEL users home and I see this temporary directory. And maybe for some reason we need to remove it. Maybe it uses up a bunch of space, or I don't know, the user asked me to remove it for some reason. But what I've seen happen occasionally is people are really sloppy with typing and some really terrible things happen. So first, if you try to remove it, it doesn't work because it's a directory, right? And so remove works for files, rmdir works for directories, but both of them only work if the thing is, or if the directory is empty. And so if we try to rmdir, right, you can't do it because the directory is not empty because it's got files in it. I could use rm to remove each individual file, and then I could use rmdir to remove the directory. However, there's a quicker, faster way of doing it that many system administrators employ, which is doing a recursive remove of this directory. So those of you who have done system administration in the past may have made a mistake like this once or twice. So we're going to do something like this. Oh, and that worked fine. That did not break it the way I wanted. 1 second, let me put it back in place. All right, let's try this one more time. Um, so on many machines, There's actually a remove alias that will make removing interactive. So it looks something like this. I'm going to try that one more time. Yep, that looks good. Okay. So you use your recursive remove, and it says, oh, do you want to remove this? And you're like, yes, I want to remove this. And it's like, oh, you want to remove this file inside of it? And you have to answer yes to all the questions. And if you answer no or hit enter to one of the prompts, it doesn't remove that file. No one tries to remove the directory that holds it. There you go. Or if it's 1,000 files, you don't want to answer yes 1,000 times. So it's often the case we'll do stuff like this. So we're going to recursively remove the directory, and -F will force it. So it basically says, don't ask me any questions. Just do what I want because I'm root and I know what I'm doing. And then you have to tell it the directory to remove. So we're going to do a home rel star. Actually, let's do man, I'm having trouble typing today. Is that right? No. One more time. Think, think. There we go. That's the typo I want to do. All right. So before I run this, let's see what this is actually going to do. So I'm saying I want to recursively remove home rel tempter and also /star. And the problem is that we put a space where we didn't mean there to be a space. And so instead of saying we're going to remove all the contents of tempter with our star, because there's a space, the RM directory now has 2 arguments. I want to recursively remove tempter and also /star. Before I run this, let's take a quick look. What is /star? It's all this stuff. So by typing with a inaccurate space and now breaking our ARM command into recursively, forcibly removing 2 different directories, one of which is tempter and the other is everything else on the entire system, all of a sudden things get really, really bad for the system. So it did indeed remove tempter, and you didn't even see it because it went by so quickly. And then it started to recursively remove all of the machine data on the system. And you can see that there's a couple things like here in proc where it can't remove these files because they are in memory, specifically in the kernel's memory, and that's read only, even for root. But yeah, it's taken a really long time to finish, a really long time. And that's your first clue that you did something really, really terrible. All right, and if you were able to catch yourself and Control C and somehow stop the horribleness from happening, maybe you would save some of your data. But at this point, your poor typing skills, your pebcac error, is going to lead you to restore all of these files and probably have to reinstall the system and replace it. This would be really, really bad. Yeah, like notice we can't run ls anymore because we've already recursively removed the user bin directory. Like, whoops, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. All right, Eric, do you have your new broken system?
Yes, I managed to re-break my system.
Excellent.
It is amazing how, after years of being cautious and trying not to break things, how you actually have to try to intentionally break something. So credit to Scott, who's been putting a lot of the legwork in on these troubleshooting episodes. So I seem to be having some trouble with Vim because I've come across another issue. And if I go in, and I'm going to try and fix this, I'm going to go in and make some changes to my test file here. But we get that swap file error again. So we've already seen this. We fixed it. So let's see. Maybe I need to do. Maybe I need to go out and clean up some processes again. Actually, I didn't kill it. Oh, goodness. Apparently, that was supposed to be dead. So what I'm trying to point out is that as you go in and try and make changes to another file, you may notice that that you get the swap file error, and that's what we were seeing. And so if you do an ls-la or an ll, you'll notice that sometimes we have a bunch of these .swp. Those are .swap files, and what those are basically basically a physical file that that is a placeholder for all the changes that you're making towards a file. And so you can't go in and save new changes when there's already changes pending. You'll see this issue a lot if the Vim process crashes, or if you're connected to a system and then your SSH session dies. You'll end up with these orphan text files, these orphan swap files. So probably one of the easiest things to do is to go in and remove said swap file, and we can then go in and make additional changes. Eric doesn't feel like a very good host today, but so if you see orphan swap files, it's probably safe to go ahead and remove those. And Aaron, I wholeheartedly agree. I don't do any remote administration anymore without using tmux, because if your SSH session dies, as it tends to do, at least everything is still alive inside your tmux session. All right. Did that last one finish building, or?
Sadly, it hit an error, so I think we're going to have to skip it. So
All
what happens
right,
when you build for source, and why we don't?
So we, yeah, that's always fun when your attempted broken installation breaks. But that does bring us to the bottom of the hour. So thank you all for joining us on this not completely. In just a second.
This not completely planned to plan troubleshooting.
Right. All right, folks. With that, I think we're going to call this episode, and we'll gosh. Anyway, we're going to call this episode. So on behalf of Scott McBrien and myself, please like and subscribe this content, because our other episodes are better planned and executed. Definitely share with a friend, and we. Now my daughter's in on this. This is great. We will see you all in a few weeks. Have a fantastic new year, and we'll see you all soon.